Good evening. Welcome to Presspass. My name is Mark Nasai. Today, it's sweet and simple, straight to the point. This is what you can expect. We'll be borrowing heavily from one of the latest editions of The Economist on a global phenomenon. See if it's really something that is a reality here. Social media's threat to democracy. Are we just blaming social media for a void that it is filling up? So let me start by asking you a question, a bit different from how I normally go. I know you want to meet my panel, some of whom you don't like to see on TV, but we still bring them back. And of course, we thank you for your time. How do you get your news on a daily basis? Is it from radio? Is it from TV? Is it from either one of the mainstream media? Or maybe it is from your local WhatsApp group, or even it is from Twitter or Facebook. Well, the reality is, I'd personally want you to say that you get your daily dose of news by tuning into NTV at night at 9, but probably that's not the case, and it's most probably because of the trend that news sources are changing, and it is really going to social media. Well, the conversation normally condemns social media while trying to assert the place of traditional media and call for stronger regulation of the ungoverned social media. Well, what's the place of mainstream media in this new reality, and is social media really a threat to our democracy here in Kenya? To help me give perspectives to this discussion, we have Carol Kibitai. She has been a managing editor at tuko.co.ke. I'm sure you're familiar with that, but right now is managing editor for the digital department at the Standard Media Group. Thank you for joining us. And Dennis Itumbi, he is a senior director of the digital communications at the PSCU, and as he also calls it, System Ya Facts. Lorna Irungu, she's a communication strategist, has been a colleague here at the Nation Media Group, and Mark Kaigwa, trying to intimidate us by looking sharper than us all here, all the men. Thank you very much for joining us. Mark Kaigwa is, of course, the founder and director at Nendo, which is a digital strategy firm. And Larry Mado, from the many hats that he wears here, thank you for staying on. Actually, he was here producing NTV today. He is actually the technology editor here at NTV, among many other things. Actually, a founder member of Presspass before he abandoned. But anyway, let's start with just some initial thoughts here. Carol, from what we are borrowing through, and if my director can show us just the grab there of what we have from this particular screen, The Economist, you already have it there in the Octopus Rundown. It says social media's threat to democracy, and goes to say that indeed there is a place to blame social media for what we would want to be a unified fabric for our democracy as we know it here in Kenya. What's your thought on this?
I read the article and I think it's very, very interesting. But I think it borrows heavily from what has been happening in the US, where the US Senate was grilling the chiefs of Facebook, Google, and Twitter. And what happened with the Russian extremists during the US election of Trump and Hillary Clinton. But what I take away from the article is the fact that you cannot really contain technology companies. They're in business. And during the election, there are various interests from various groups, which I'm sure we are all going to talk about this evening.
Yes.
So everyone is trying to push an agenda, and we saw that during the just concluded election, and we are still in an election mode, where influencers, where opinion makers are trying to push agenda, but also using technology to ensure that that agenda reaches as many people as possible. So we are seeing a lot of that happening in terms of agenda setting. So is it right or wrong? I'm sure that's something we're going to debate this evening. But you see, once I go on social media, I become a broadcaster in my own right. So, and since my followers, or those who I believe follow me, are not able to verify some of the things that I claim to be true, I start setting out the agenda for my followers, which outside social media becomes something to talk about in a bar, in a salon, even in a school. When you go to pick your children up, you're doing small talk with a parent, you're talking about something that you read on social media, more more than what you read in a newspaper. So it's actually setting an agenda for lots of discussions, even at family level.
Speaking of agenda setting, Dennis, is what you do with System Your Facts at the PSCU, being a mouthpiece for the government, or are you holding up democracy for Kenya?
Well, it speaks for itself. Facts speak for that democracy. But let me say this, because we started with an article from The Economist. There was a brilliant response by Emily Parker in the New York Times, where she basically argues that that Silicon Valley is not the problem. They do not create the bad habit. The bad habit is actually what we are. Social media is just a platform which, largely speaking, is a mirror. It's a reflection of our own conversations. So we should stop blaming the platform and probably stop being swayed, because we are a society that is swayed by misinformation and addicted to sensation. One of the issues we'll be bringing up is this headline by the Business Daily. Safaricom sheds 20 billion in a week of NASA boycott. So that kind of sensation in our headlining, and the headlines become the tweet, is what actually has what has undermined us. And we are very happy to share fake information, to blame the mirror, a reflection of ourselves. And let me end this way at the start.
We're just getting started.
Yeah, okay, let me start this way. let me just frame and start this way. That probably social media is not a threat to democracy, which is a topic you gave us as we came here. I'm beginning to think that actually it is a new form of democracy. Maybe we'll call it Twittercracy.
Twittercracy. All right. Lorna, your initial thoughts on this?
I think my initial thought is, first, what are the principles of democracy? What is it that is actually under threat? And I was just looking at, part of it is that this issue of social media being a threat to democracy has come up in very many forums, but is also a really well-done paper written by the Media Network, and that's actually how they framed it and looked at what the different challenges are. But one of the things you look is that if you define what democracy is, and it's what are the principles that would be undermined by social media? It picks up on some of the things they've talked about. It's trust, it is informed dialogue, it's a shared sense of reality, it is mutual consent, it's participation. So if you look at those as the principle, trust, shared values, how does social media then threaten those? And part of the thing that I think came out in that article, and what I think is being felt, and I would move to say it's not just about Silicon Valley or the US. What that has done is really pushed it in the light and right at the front, is that there are a couple of issues that come out around that, and he's just picked on one of them. One is the issues that I think will end up being a key crisis would be echo chambers. We all kind of want to hear the people we surround ourselves with. And so social media becomes a space where it's an echo chamber, where there's polarization and hyper-partnership, where people want to pick an issue and then really reinforce it. And you can reinforce that issue with facts. Now, that I don't believe your fact means I'm not in your echo chamber, but you're not listening to me. You're listening to like-minded people. So that's one. Spread of false or misleading information. So what has come to be known as fake news. But fake news is not just about wrong news. It's also about phrasing a story in a particular way to spread a particular message. That's one of the big things that's coming out of that. Manipulation by populist leaders, by governments, fringe actors, people who have an agenda, and this is a space where they can subvert, or they can pass protocol, or they can monetize, or they can change the story, and they have a broadcast channel. And the question is, who are they broadcasting to? Okay. And the space of this is a lot of politicians. And finally, there's a lot of personal data capture. And that allows people who are smart enough, who can use those algorithms, who can figure out Mark is on this website, this website. So Mark is inclined to listen to this, this, and that. And if I poke this, this, and that hole, or put up this message, Mark is going to pick it up. And these are all this is not abstract. It's deliberate, it's systematic, it's scientific, and it has been proven to work. Okay. So it's just this huge space where you can no longer control everything, and where the smartest of people are able to manipulate it. And
Mark, it normally gets a bad rep, social media that is, but in your line of work, you really look at the positives, at least what we can bring out, the positives and lucrative side of it. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I think there's a quote that I like by Sudanese entrepreneur Mo Ibrahim, where he said, this was in the early and mid 2000s, that quote is loosely attributed to that time when he was in charge of Celtel, that mobile phones and mobile penetration in and of themselves can be a democratizing factor to the point that a dictatorship struggles to stand, because simply these devices in the hands of everyday citizens allow for the flow of information in a way that he believed at that point would uphold democracy. Now, what we've seen over the past decade, Facebook being 13 years old now, which is it's a powerful way to think of how fast technology continues to evolve,
yes,
is that not only was he right, but what he could not have anticipated at that time was that the information itself could not only isolate us, but be used to ends that both fracture our societies in some ways, but ultimately also show us our truest expressions of ourselves. So just the same way that in a place like Nairobi, known as Silicon Savannah, a business based out of Silicon Valley can come here, and even before formalized forms of credit get into the hearts, minds, and pockets and smartphones of everyday people, they can lend, in excess of R1 billion shillings every month, and simply because of small bits of data, 10,000 data points off of any one of us who might not even be in the formal financial system. Imagine what we can do information-wise by targeting messages in the same way. So in this way, what I'm saying is that I believe it does actually enhance still measures of democracy. I think we're a country that is fast rising in terms of internet penetration and so on. And as a digital society, we're finding our feet. Right. But my lens, as you said, in terms of positivities, if we look back, a lot of people tend to say that if you want to look at politics or even democracy, look at history too. And in digital history in Kenya, social media has a lot more good that it's done, especially over the last 5 years. And it can be easy for us to lose sight of that in the last year, 6 months, and have that as our pure frame of reference.
Right. And Larry, as a technology editor, I mean, are we losing our place, first of all, as mainstream media? I mean, this is not directly to the issue of democracy, but our place in this democracy to social media. Is this something that we should be concerned about?
I think now more than ever our role is important, because the role of social media and our democracy has come into sharp focus over this past year, and especially with this extended election season. Because let me illustrate for you. A few days after the last election, I attended a press conference which was addressed by NASA leaders, and I asked a question or two to James Orengo. And later on, somebody made up an entire conversation that I'm supposed to have had with James Orengo, and they shared it on Facebook. And it went around really quickly. They say a lie gets halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. And so by the time this got to me, maybe 2 hours later, people were already attacking me about this supposed poor questions I'd asked James Orengo. This entire conversation did not happen. The questions that I'm supposed to have asked him, I did not ask him. And so I shared a link to a video of the actual press conference, which was live streamed by NASA, not by NTV. And people said, no, you're defending yourself. We know you're a terrible journalist because you must have asked those questions. I'm like, but why would you believe this? And it goes to what Lorna was talking about, the echo chamber that the social media has created. So in the US, they talk about filter bubbles. Liberals see only stuff that supports what they believe, and the same with right-wingers. And in Kenya, that has been the same case. If you're a NASA supporter, you'll only see and seek out information that agrees with your point of view. Right. You support Raila Odinga, and therefore you're looking for all that information. And the reverse is also true. If you support Jubilee and President Kenyatta, you're following Moses Kuria, you're following Dennis Itumbi, you look for people who reinforce your beliefs. And within this echo chamber, everybody agrees with you. It's confirmation bias, but also you've pre-selected accounts and sources and organizations and bloggers that support your point of view, and you're not listening to anything else. So that is how it is possible that NASA supporters will believe. I had a conversation with James Orengo, which goes back to what they already believe about me or what they think about the media being biased in that case. Yes. And that's a problem, because now more than ever, people are afraid to seek out any information that challenges them, any information that you might disagree with. So you either discount it or deliberately don't listen to it. But I think even in the face of that, the role of social media in democracy is now greater. There's a threat, obviously, because of misinformation and sensationalism and fake news and clickbait. And it's odd to see Itumbi talking about some of these things when himself and the people he works for, the people that he supports, have turned that into an art form. But that's an issue we can discuss later. Yeah. But now more than ever, it's a complement to a democracy, because even in the space of all of that, Boniface Mangi raised, 10 million shillings on social media? That would not have been possible 10 years ago. There's people who are keeping their governments accountable. County governments are having people arrested because they question budget lines, which would not have been possible before. And all of this is happening because it has democratized what we'd probably not cover on NTV, but somebody there in Nyamira or Nyeri is looking at this and saying, no, this is not right. I'm going to speak up about it, and it will get picked up.
So we're doing much more than we would have had been able to do without this space. I mean, just the other day we were raising money for the digital humanitarian, and a lot came through in a matter of hours just to help his situation right now. And I trust that he is getting better right now. So there's a good element to this social media platform that there are new platforms every day. But we'll be addressing the common ones and looking at the aspect of the vitriol that is spread and it festers. And perhaps people think of it as a source from the social media platform itself, but perhaps it's just with us and has been, and it's just amplified by the social media platform that we have. So we'll be getting back to this and more right after this break. Welcome back to Presspass. Took a bit of time there trying to fix our internet, but it's still not cooperating. And Dennis is willing to donate some Wi-Fi, but we will not be taking government donations. And we'll continue. I will look at my HTC here. Yes, you don't want to be accused here.
I'm going to defend him. He was trying to facilitate your show. You have.
That's what they call it, Lona. It's facilitation.
Yeah, So I'll consult my HTC as our technical guy tries to sort us out here. But this Ochere Eric says, no, blame it on social media users who take anything they come across on social media as gospel truth, verify, unverify, and re-verify before you consume it. And let me go to another one. Odera Omondi says, social media isn't a threat to democracy. It actually promotes it because it gives us a room to express ourselves from anywhere. It only undermines values such as honesty, curiosity, and tolerance. And for that reason, its use should be regulated. Let me get Mark's opinion on this, because it came up a bit in some form of conversation. This issue always comes up about regulation so that it can control that room or that space and how people carry themselves out. What do you think about this?
Right, well, I think I'm not a lawyer, but the Constitution is clear about what it affords Kenyans by way of their freedoms. And since it's been promulgated, that's really what we follow. Coming online, I think freedom of expression, freedom of essentially digital assembly, freedom of the opportunity to consume content that upholds and affirms your worldview, as Larry said, whether confirmation bias or simply just an appetite for stories. If you look at the election primaries and some research around false news, people on either side of the political divide tend to have an appetite and a desire, particularly those who have made up their minds. The undecideds tend to be a smaller percentage than people may give credit for. So they're being served with news that is across the spectrum of mostly false to mostly true and everything in between, and they're happily consuming it. Right. Now, that's their right. Now, if you ask me about regulation, I think the history of, and that's why I said history, let's look at the past 2 decades, 3 decades, and more at how regulation across this country has happened. And globally, in terms of social media regulation, I've just seen a tweet right now that as President Trump has visited Beijing, there's been very aggressive regulation around exposing Chinese people on Weibo and several of their other social networks to negative stories about him. Yeah. And so that's what regulation looks like in this day and age. It's sophisticated, it's very powerful, and it may be happening now by ways of, let me just call it broadly, state surveillance. But if you ask about regulation, mine would be to allow and follow what rather the Constitution presents us with, because the global examples and history tells us that this might be a road we're not entirely sure where it'll end.
Yeah, and an issue of regulation, it could be the opposite of what's happening in China. And perhaps, as some would say, the government and or the opposition would master the use of these social media platforms to control the same information that would be controlled in a scenario like in China with the Great Wall. What's your opinion on this?
I think part of That's what I was talking about. If you look at the key issue around this, is one of the things that really stands up is manipulation by populist leaders, government, or just fringe actors, so people who have the ability to use that platform to manipulate things. Now let's be very clear. Social media is a form of media. And when you go back to what the entire role of media was to present ideas in a specific way to be able to control a message. That hasn't changed. At the principle of it, that hasn't changed. The thing that has changed now is, whereas before radio was the most powerful medium, especially if you were an African leader, all you needed to do was shut down the broadcast and you had everyone's control. What captures people? This is about human psychology. It is about our need to engage. So part of it, and I agree with him on that, is that regulation is really, people will find ways around it. Go back to history. What has happened when you've regulated radio? What happened when people could not speak on radio? They found other ways to communicate. We are innovative. We will figure a way out. And for me, part of the thing is, and I appreciate this about social media, I say for me, it allows me to see people in their true colors. There are no filters. People have reached the point where if I am a strong believer in this fact, I'm going to find things that allow me to reinforce it. It could be a streak, it could be gender bias, it could be any kind of biases, as Larry talked about. It's just confirmation bias. So I don't know if regulation is actually the way, but it's also a system where you have to use the law, or you have to use what's available for you, because understand that part of this, and all the data shows, and Mark, I'm sure, can confirm this, he's the data guy on stats on this, but globally, then everyone, on social media, they tend to believe individuals more than institutions. So you're looking for somebody who reflects you, your thinking, your ideology, somebody who you can say, that's my person, right? And not an institution. And even if you go and look at followers or things like that, very few institutions actually have rapid followers. But oh my goodness, some random musician will have 10 million people in 2 seconds. People want to see themselves or what they appeal to. And because of that, how do you regulate that? How do I regulate your influence as a person? So part of the challenge then has to be, what are the rules? How are you doing this? Are you causing harm? And I think what's happening in the US now with Facebook and Google and all these people going through this Senate hearings and starting to hear, what role did you play in this manipulation of an election, of an entire population of people, is going to be key. But the data is out there. In fact, there's a report by a PR company called Edelman Trust. They do a global survey, and it says 59% of global respondents said they would rather trust a search engine than they would a human editor. And so in that case, if Google tells me, if I Google and it tells me the first thing that comes up is X amount of thing is evil, even you, Mark Masai, if you go and say, no, these are my facts, human beings, 59% would rather believe the search engine that has got various algorithms put in to kind of put that or misinformation than they'll believe a human being. And that for you starts showing you how much of an echo chamber social media can be. Perhaps
that's a fact that Dennis and the team have mastered in their system of facts. Is this what you do in terms of controlling the narrative as the PSCU?
Of course, I mean, if you're a user of social media, you have to master the algorithm so that you can be able to know how to package your information. But more importantly, Mr. Mark,
for misinformation?
Democracy
has
been defined. No, I will answer that question, and another one he raised, but at the time, not at this. He has to remember he's a panelist today. If democracy was defined in history, and there were some bits like a ballot is stronger than a bullet. And if that is true, if indeed a ballot is stronger than a bullet, then surely a tweet cannot kill democracy. But having said that, let me quote a dilemma put up by C.S. Lewis about a ship. And he said a ship has 3 important questions to ask. First question is, how do I avoid sinking? And that is personal. And then he said, how does a ship not bump into other ships? And that becomes a matter of social ethics. And finally, and which is more important, why is a sea in the place it is at this moment? And that brings me to the BuzzFeed analysis that was done, I think, published last month, that said that most people would rather believe a story that's been posted on Facebook or Twitter, and or even more fake news because it has more interaction than one from mainstream media. So how did we get here? It is because of declining credibility of the mainstream media in setting the record straight. And I'll give you an example. He illustrated something. We have the World Internal Security Police Index. One of the last 4 tweets by Larry Madowo on his timeline right now is around that issue. I can bet you he hasn't read this report. He doesn't know how many pages it is. I challenge him to come along if he does. But you know that I sent you this report actually directed to yourself. So this was printed from NTV, not from State House. And one of the pages...
That's why you sent it to me.
Yes. On page 50, they clearly say the 4 pillars that are used to do this. Legitimacy, confidence in police, outcomes, blah, 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 blah. Out of all this, they make a disclosure. The measurement period, 2014, 2010 to 2012, 2013. Yet, the media has made us believe this is a recent report. Beyond that, a more startling thing, on page 55, which you remember was missing when I came in, but you had to reprint it together with your assistant. It clearly declares, in my opinion. So this whole report is an opinion of a person. It is not even an international report, yet the media has gone with it. It's believable. Is that a threat to democracy?
Put the context.
The context, I've started by putting the context. That why people believe the fake news is
that
because
this was quoted out of place?
Completely out of place. And it is in the report, page 55. And I've quoted, in my opinion, it's very clear, and it's online. You have a full copy of it on your WhatsApp, and I'm also going to share a link on my Twitter timeline in a few. All right. In other words, the tweets, the media has failed in setting the record straight. They have donated, they have donated the floaters of truth to rumor, like on Star we have Corridors of Power, in some other newspapers we have Palava, on Sunday Nation we have a rumor column. We have donated our ability to sift fact from fiction through paid up analysts, politicians, part of evil society that is called evil, and in the process, a fiction novel without a concluding paragraph or chapter has been written.
First, before Larry pounces back, let's have Carol.
Yes, I think Dennis is here because he's on a payroll, and I think he needs to explain.
You're also in a payroll, right?
Yeah, I am, but I think when you start saying that the media is publishing falsehood, I think that's not true.
But I've given you
But
this.
I must say this, we as the media, and I'll talk on behalf of the media house I work for, we stand for truth, at least from where I stand. And he started saying, before I get into what he's saying, you talked about regulation. I think as a profession, we even self-regulate. You're not going to have us posting, or if you have a Twitter account, say KTN News or whatever, we have to verify information. So it is something that is built into editorial policy. We don't just wake up and start
Did you
posting
verify this?
Everything. Let me finish. So I think in terms of accuracy and independence, I think the media needs to have that on their own, and journalists need to be taken into account as far as that is concerned. For government, you have a right to talk about what you think is truth. But what is the real truth? Just because you see it from your perspective does not make it truth.
But that is the document.
And just because,
surely.
Yeah.
The facts are there. I mean, now dispute this because you tweeted, as a managing editor of Digital at Standard, you tweeted this out. Those are the facts. That is the report. You haven't even seen it yourself, but the tweet was done by Standard Digital.
Okay, let's get the perspective from Larry, and he's basing it on what some 4 last tweets that you put out based on the police.
First of all, Dennis Itumbi has no moral authority to speak on fake news, misinformation, or downright deception, because that's what you've made a career of. And either people who work for you, I'll quote an instance for you. Yeah. The Minister of Foreign Affairs tweeted a fake document, and it was up there for nearly 12 hours. Fake, from Vanguard Africa. The US agency that's supposed to have written it disowned it. Vanguard Africa disowned it, but it was there on the official Minister of Foreign Affairs website. I don't know if that's official government foreign policy, or embarrassment is what we do now as a state. But that's beside the point. This document we refer to...
Can I just respond to that? Because it's important. I mean, the context is important.
Let him finish his...
This document you refer to, the tweet you refer to is actually an extraction of our story, our news from last night. And if you look at my computer, you'll see this, while Internal Security and Policy Index is actually in red, which means I've accessed it before. I wrote that story myself. It was a graphic story which explained all of these different things. I read through the entire document. I read through 127 different countries that the best performing and the worst performing. I read through the recommendations, etc. This is the most recent police ranking available. And even if you listen to that, the tweet has a video attached to it. If you listen to the video, literally the second sentence says, this is not a measure of police activity. It just means these are the countries that have the best national security responses to internal security occurrences. So if you had bothered to go into the detail, you'd have seen that it has plenty of caveats from what the headline is.
Let me respond to that. First of all, this has already been declared as a personal opinion. And he has even gone further to record 7 points of that personal opinion. So it's not an international report.
That is not true. It's not a personal opinion.
True. It is true. Yes,
when you write a report, and Lorna, anybody's done research will tell you, based on what the data shows, this is what I feel needs to be done. It does not mean the entire report is an opinion. You wouldn't call it an index if it was an opinion, Dennis.
Well, can we call it an informed opinion? This is the report that they've given.
Well, without a declaration that actually all the data that has been relied on has been reports that were published further. For instance, one of the glaring issues in this report, it says that Kenya has a police ratio to Mwananchi at 1 to 900. In the State of the Nation report 2017, the data, the report was clearly put, and media reported it, to be 1 policeman to 390. If you put that 1 to 390 on the ranking that is there, Kenya would emerge number 10, using the same criteria that has been used here. But because we don't invest in research in media houses, and because we do not give attention to all these things that have been put here, it becomes a problem. Back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The media itself has an opportunity, which they call run a correction. So that you run a story that is wrong, the next day you can run a correction and an apology, and that matter.
So in this case,
in this case, there was a mistake from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I actually saw it later because I mean, every ministry has a Twitter, has a social media person attached to it, and it was withdrawn and an apology made.
There was no apology. There was no apology.
There was an apology.
There was no apology. I actually DM'd Amina Mohammed and said, "What is this? What's this?"
I'm actually going to share that.
There was no apology.
All right, share a link. Complete actually.
Get that apology and share it.
But there was an apology, and if it's not been circulated and communicated, it shall be done. That is wrong, and we are sorry about that communication, and it's been corrected.
Well, now you say that's the apology. There's something I want to get to, and I want to.
Yes, we need to move on. We're not here to talk about
media. You see, media acts like that when they are wrong. And they know they're wrong, and the evidence is tabled, and they cannot get away from it. What they quickly do is, let's move on. Let's forget about this. Media can't be wrong. Yet, we're discussing about that being a threat.
Sir. I'm happy to engage
then
you in that.
Then he says, he makes a very serious allegation on my person, that we spread misinformation using different bits. First of all, we have no apology for propaganda, because propaganda can be both positive and negative.
So you do engage in propaganda as a matter of fact?
It's propaganda to say NTV is the home of truth. It's a form of propaganda. So that form of propaganda that preaches the truth is what we associate with under the systems of fact. And when Zari says that, I am more than willing not only to offer a gift to him if he can show me one thing on my timeline that is wrong.
Again, we're not taking bribes.
Right.
But
I'm sorry, can I just push back really quickly? I'm sorry, Mark, I know you need to move on.
And I want to have Mark
in this election season, it's not been on your official Twitter account for obvious reasons. One of the questions that should be is not whether or not you have bots that work and push your agendas, but how many bots. The other one is there have been many, many different instances of fake news stories, purportedly from the BBC, from CNN, from NTV. We've seen a couple of those which supported the Jubilee point of view, which is where you are at. And not once did you say we did not produce this and we do not support it. It supported your point of view. And then two, there's still the unquestioned and very dangerous work of Cambridge Analytica in Kenya, whose work has been misinformation.
Who said there's Cambridge Analytica in Kenya?
Well, let's get to
Cambridge Analytica has confirmed they're working here in Kenya. And what they're doing, you saw a lot of websites that under the real Raila, and they basically did scaremongering. They did a lot of misinformation, supporting the Jubilee point of view. And again, not Dennis Itumbi, not Jubilee, not President Kenyatta has come out to say, we are not doing this, this is not our work.
But
which means
that
it's a tacit endorsement of all the work that has been done.
That's another tip. Hold on.
I'm actually just telling Larry that this is just a new form of ecstasy of communication. And whereas he may resist, a majority of us will continue embracing it.
Embracing what? This particular misinformation?
No. Embracing the system of facts. And
hold on. This issue of system of facts. There's you work for a digital consultancy firm, and I'm sure it's in your field to do fact checking, and this is a great need right now in any firm, whether it's in the mainstream media. It is becoming a need because people are stuck. Like Lorna is just looking, at Dennis and yeah.
It's tennis. It's an interesting game of tennis.
And this aspect of fact checking, it's much needed. What's the way forward in this, in fact checking these facts that are being thrown back and forth?
Sure, I think it's something which the whole world is grappling with now. So there's not that many people who have as many answers. However, what we've seen coming out of the US, particularly because they have seemingly the biggest repercussions that really across the political divide, left and right, they're grappling with. Right, in terms of President Trump and his approach towards leadership. I think if we look at First Draft, which is an organization now which has come and is really you know, mainstream media, new media, actors from across the sector who have brought themselves together to say, how are we actually going to filter this new information landscape? Where, as I said, you know, here as early as the party primaries in April, right? Thanks to the work of Odipo Dev, there was some research that we've been able to access and that's publicly available that examines fake news or false news and looks at how the market, the mind share or the share of voice, it has, as I said, a loyal audience. If you look at the top 5 false news stories from that time, you know, for purposes of not fueling the flames, I may not repeat the headlines here, but there was always this element of doubt. So some people in the digital information landscape will play into perhaps misinformation, right? So there is an actual fact that's taken place, but the interpretation is perhaps you know, taking a little you know, some great liberties in the reporting, right? Then you have disinformation, where people will genuinely manufacture a story. It's also, Kenyans right now watching this broadcast have been fatigued of the numerous leaked documents that they've gotten in their WhatsApp groups, to the point where if a legitimate document is shared, the amount of scrutiny it goes through. I've seen people actually say, you know what, this typeface is Calibri and on this page it's Times New Roman. And I'm like, who are you? You're not a graphic designer. But genuinely, people are learning this vigilance, but at the same time, for the broad majority of people, it's fatigue. That disinformation is actually out there, not just to affirm and play to the base, but ultimately to disinform and lead to some kind of substantive action. The day after we had voted, a legitimate video recorded by a media house here of a protest along University Way was released, and it's a legitimate real video shot from what's likely Anniversary Towers if you look at the angle, and if you're verifying that, the video is legitimate. It's user-generated content from an actual person there, but the date is inaccurate. So people are there thinking that there's tear gas and protests and so on downtown, and yeah, that's inaccurate. Right. And then on this other side, there's legitimate information, people who are tempted to sway themselves this way. So what we've seen is essentially a cottage industry online of people who are happy to take funds from brands. There's a lot of brands who fueled and provided the initial kind of kindling that's led to them being essentially weaponized in this political season. And we're seeing it across the board, across both parties. And while it's concerning, as I said, ultimately, when I zoom out past 6 months, past 2 years, past electioneering, I still have a positive disposition on where we stand in terms of social media, but there's still great concern. And the US is grappling, Germany and France are grappling, China is. We're no different, even though it's a much smaller audience. Maybe the final point is, I think one thing that happens here on media platforms is that we disproportionately weight Twitter over other social networks. Now, according to Nendo's study, we've seen that there's about 1 million monthly active users on Twitter. Now, Twitter is a microcosm. It is by far the most influential, the single most influential social network, but it is a paltry, you know, 7th in a sense, or Facebook rather, is 7.5 times the size of Twitter. And you don't see that kind of essentially representation here. So if I write a comment seeking to engage one of you on a particular show, I'm not likely to make the news, but I can open a Twitter account today, and many people have, and as I said, a cottage industry of people who have recognized they can actually game or trick or influence what appears on nationwide screens through Twitter in particular. So there's I think a need for greater scrutiny, but I'm still cautiously optimistic about the future, but navigating the day-to-day with vigilance, especially with fake news. And
there's some scrutiny that you've done with your team, and you'll probably be able to share some of the initial drafts that you have in terms of the effect of the boycott and how it's being felt online. And we'll discuss that because it's something Dennis also wants to bring up in terms of challenging the facts that have been put out by the Business Daily, the Weekend Business Daily. We're taking another quick break. We'll be back with our final part of this program. Welcome back to a final part, and we're talking about social media. There's so much to talk about it and can't be exhausted in one panel unless we go on till Tuesday, and we won't do that. But Lorna, you following what, let's call them gentlemen, the niceties they had in terms of the facts, and there's something that comes up in terms of distrust and doubt. We're naturally skeptical whenever we hear any fact. So if it's from mainstream media, we're told we're biased to a particular side of the political divide, or we have been silenced monetarily. Or if it's from the government, PSCU, he's clearly holding brief for the government or opposition or whatever. So there's naturally distrust. Okay, that's clear. So there's a natural distrust. So even as we have the two gentlemen or two institutions holding their positions with facts, there's still people who are asking, no, why would I believe them?
So part of the thing is this, and we need to be very aware of this, and it's a difficult thing to kind of navigate, is intuitively as human beings, the hardest thing to say is, I am sorry. This is something you are taught as a child. You have to learn how to apologize. It is almost impossible for your MD to have made a mistake, you take the flak, and to come and tell you, I was sorry, I did wrong. We are taught, there are seminars on how to accept yourself and to be able to speak your truth. If this was something that was simple, we would not have to go through all those lessons to unlearn and learn things and learn how to live in things. There's a reason why societies have law and order. There's a reason why there's actually a law, do not kill. To kill is bad. You will be punished. Actually, we will kill you for killing. Isn't that common sense? That don't take a life? Shouldn't it be common sense? So let's just first understand that humanity, as it is, as we're built, as we're structured, there are things that we just will not work according to norms, which is why society has rules and regulations. And let's go back to social media. And she said it at the beginning, and so did he. And he talked about the fact that it's kind of like, don't blame us. We are the ones who say these things. We are the ones who do these things. It's a space where you can speak. And go and figure out, in this new world order, if someone has figured out that our new way of communicating is not sitting down and having a conversation. It is me thinking I'm friends with Beyonce 30,000 miles away because I can exchange a message with her. There is psychology that goes into that. There's psychology that goes into creating a Twitter page, and what does that look like? Where would I click? Where does my brain psychologically go for me to interact? Let us not underestimate the companies, money, and organizations that have spent a lot of money into research and getting us to figure out ways how to trust this technology. You do know there are people who are just like, I don't trust Facebook. I'm not on Facebook because that's not the way you deal with people. But we have been conditioned to trust all these things. 5 years ago, we would not have been connecting our bank accounts to our phones. Now, if you're not doing it, who are you? So understand that there's a lot of stuff that has gone to show you to trust it in conversations, in payments, in health. So doctors are starting to complain that people Google symptoms and Google the possibility instead of actually going to see somebody. Now look at that power. Understand that somebody who can look at you, and I have talked to an organization that does that. This is their entire job. And part of the job that they do is then change campaigns around. What do? Simply monitor social media. And they're able to say, this is a conversation happening in your country. If I pick Mark Masai's account, it's not just his age, I'm looking at 400 data points. If I shape the conversation in 5 different ways, he will buy into this. That's what happened a lot with Trump stuff. That's what happened a lot with Hillary in the States. Why are we assuming that we are so far behind in some of these issues? And understand, this is not just about politics, and I'm going to leave politics out for a while for this, but even businesses, even people selling stuff. So there is a lot of work that is done, and manipulating those platforms is a service that is then sold. My problem is actually not fake news as much as what Mark alluded to earlier, where there's a bit of right information. I have just presented it to you in a way that suits me. And the reason why you can't argue with facts, and the reason why I cannot argue with Dennis Itumbi on his facts, is that they're exactly that. His facts, his version of facts. And he can provide as much information as he can to defend his position. Racists do the same thing. Democrats do the same thing. Liberals do the same thing. And those who are pedophiles do the same thing. Everyone can take a fact and use it for themselves. So when he talks about system of facts, the system of facts looking at whose lens and who else supports that fact, who doesn't. And that's why we can go into a whole argument about one article without necessarily saying that there are facts in there. Are 26 other countries wrong? Are we now saying methodology of research is absolutely wasteful? And so part of it is to say system of, facts
No, you have
are
to
facts, and you
She
can
hasn't
defend
even
your
read
own
this
facts.
report, and she
No,
wants
no,
to-
no, I'm
she
just
wants to
using
make an
that.
argument about
I'm
all
using
these
it.
data security
Excuse
policies.
me,
It's
Dennis.
an
I did
example.
not-
She's let her
Excuse
finish.
me,
Let her
Dennis.
finish it. Let her
All
finish
I'm
it.
saying is, it is not about one country. It is not about, it's the way, your argument is that it is false, it's an opinion, it's all these things. But someone can take that same argument, throw it to you and say, that's also your opinion. So my argument is generic.
not an opinion, it's a fact.
Listen. The fact is dependent on who is looking at it and what data they're using to
That's a
support
camera,
that
Roland.
opinion.
It's a camera. It's a camera. There's no one. Even if you look at it, it will
There
never
are
be a box.
three
It's
different
a camera.
cameras.
It's a camera.
It
And I'm
is
pointing at
three
one.
different cameras. Yes, but also that other one could also be a camera.
now we're getting into semantics.
You see,
Yeah.
semantics, exactly.
Right.
There are 5 different forms of cameras. There could be a small camera hidden behind them, but just because you
But
can't
it's a
see
camera.
it, no, just because you can't see it doesn't mean
But
it
it is a
doesn't
camera.
exist.
All right, let's let's not get into the technical aspect of what we have in our studio.
Exactly.
Talk about the issue at the table. Mark, you shared some of the initial data that you have in terms of the effect of the boycott, and just explain what you have you've been able to mine through to be able to understand what we can get from social media in terms of feedback.
Sure. So this is a preliminary report, as I said. So it comes with its usual caveats. So some of this is, has the potential to change. But when we look at the month of November specifically, is about 5.7 million tweets in this time, which is not too different from previous months. There was a spike on the 3rd, the day that the boycott was announced. And Twitter, I should add, is predominantly male, to some 70 or 73% in this time of study, as we try to zero in. As you'd imagine, the 3 companies that are the focus of the boycott at this stage, Safaricom, Bidco, and Brookside, have borne much of the attention. The hashtag resist, even though it may not have been trending to many viewers over the same period of time, is amongst the highest ones. So it has clearly at a ratio of almost like 2 to 1. It outnumbers some of the other hashtags. And I should explain, this is with the exception of the gain and essentially follow train are members of Digital Society of Twitter. That said, former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, his trip to the CSIS in the United States was also in this top 10. In terms of the single individual, politically speaking, with the highest amount of mentions to their specific account, it was the President Kenyatta, with former Prime Minister Raila Odinga not too far behind, Citizen TV in there as well. Airtel, believe it or not, also there too. Safaricom, about 61,000 mentions. So these numbers at a high level, what they're telling us is that this has driven conversation in a way different to weeks and months prior. Now, what we would require to ultimately support some of the conclusions that either viewers may now be perhaps seeking to arrive at is actual market data of, so if we go into retail and trade and essentially the supply chain, what's been the impact there? There's a lot of information now that shows perhaps offers for certain brands that may lead people to believe, well, it's clear that it's working, or it may be clear that you see lines outside of different telecommunications companies and their shops. There are several high-profile bloggers or digital influencers here. I'm definitely not going to name them, but what it's showing us is that where they lie on the digital divide, because the data, after all, doesn't lie. It is what it is, and it's open to interpretation. So I can show it to any one of you here, and you can arrive at your conclusions.
Absolutely.
But what we're trying to do is just present a fair evaluation of this impact, and clearly online, it's meeting the customer service teams of these organizations. It's seeing potential switching taking place. But I should add, even though it seems like it's a national debate, 88% of this conversation is in Nairobi alone.
And that's something else. Yeah, that's something else I'd want us to talk about. I mean, we make it look like the whole country is really concerned about this when something is trending.
Yes, I think I want to poke holes onto your theory.
Yeah, sure.
I'll say theory because we've just discussed the happenings in the US. So how can you prove that some of those trends are not generated by someone pushing an agenda?
For sure.
Because sometimes we take some of this data and make it truth. So I hate Lorna and I start a hashtag. We've seen it happen to Larry. that we believe the whole country thinks Larry is the most handsome guy. Let me use a nice example. So we need to look at this.
I thought that was me, but
yes.
I like that.
Yes. So we need to look at this data with a pinch of salt.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes, even when you go to clients, for example, and you're rating people, and you have all these bloggers, and they have generated all these conversations and impressions, but if you dig deeper, you ask yourself, what is it? And that is what we need to ask, because sometimes we believe that the country is headed this way, and we saw it several months ago. One headline had the country is headed on the positive. The other headline, the country is headed on the negative. So we need to ask ourselves, and sometimes that opinion, and one person, you could be an influencer, you could define it as truth.
Right.
Or Mark can run with it and say, this is the truth, and this company is actually closing down because we have 50 million retweets and all this stuff. So back to the point of the space of social media and democracy, we also need to ask ourselves, where are we as a country? What are we consuming the most?
Oh, he has that information. It's not nice.
Yes.
Right.
So
It's vices that are driving.
It's vices.
yes,
internet.
so it's
It's
devices,
Putting the
and
charity
the other
down.
thing is, how many devices do I have?
Sure, absolutely.
I have an iPad, I have all this, he has
Hannah,
5
did you say
phones.
vices or devices?
Vices.
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 Oh, sorry, Carol.
Yes.
Yeah. Vices.
Right.
Yes, so, and there are bots, for example.
Yes.
Many bots.
Yes,
Maybe
many,
just
many,
to
many,
add,
many.
just, I hadn't shared it because it can't change, but from what I see here on the 3rd of November, again, I have to give a caveat. I know the tool we're using, I trust it a lot. It's called Crimson Hexagon, in addition to our own independent data study to confirm or support it. But it said that there were 6,500 daily authors on that day. That is
Ridiculous.
tremendously low, especially given Twitter and those larger numbers I said. So it makes us wonder about how many multiple accounts, if these are essentially some of the unique authors, it brings and underscores your point. However, I elected not to present it because, again, I need to be able to take it to the bank. But it is true, and I support every word you said, that there are people who've understood this and tried to capitalize to make things larger than life, when indeed it's more smoke than fire.
Right, and let me put it to you straight on that particular point. Is this what you do with your team? And it's been said before, the 36 bloggers. Just to clear the air on this issue. Do you have influencers who push a particular agenda?
Mark, what you're trying to do.
I've asked you a question. You could say yes or no.
I mean, and I'm going to answer it. What we are trying to do as a panel is trying to blame people for mastering the platform where they are. If you're a preacher and you preach best from the book of Exodus because you understand the Old Testament more, perfect. If you're a newscaster and you do better in sports than you do in business, perfect. Maybe you report better on live coverage more than you do in a studio.
Well, if you're a preacher who preaches 310 and we know it's a lie, we'll call
yeah,
you
perfect.
out.
But probably
Even
you
if you're a
preach it
preacher.
so well and you get the 310. So basically, if we master our game, it should not be something that we should be blamed for. In any case, all these platforms we are discussing here today, none of them is produced in Kenya. I mean, Twitter, Facebook, all have their headquarters in the US. I mean, it's just the way you appreciate it, the way you understand the terms of use, and the way you deploy it to pass your information.
So have
and
you
on that,
deployed
it's not-
influencers
and that is why I
to
say
shape the propaganda or agenda that you have?
I'll say this.
System ya facts.
I'll say this. System ya facts has many disciples. Even Jesus had disciples. Let me now say this. Just like Homo sapiens became Homo erectus, I think the information age has also evolved. We came from a period where we were being informed. The media had to get sources and tell. And now we got to an age where we have the information. We became the sources of the information. People who used to tell the media to write the story for them got a platform where they can tell their own story. And now we're in an age where we just appear informed. And I must say this, I mean, people here, even including yourself, have spoken about government, about Jubilee, about NASA. And I have to say this, there's nothing wrong with partyism. Absolutely nothing. And now, having said that, and for me to put up this point and to end it and give it to another person to take, let me bring back this Safaricom sheds 20 billion.
Can we have it on screen? Yes, just.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Safaricom sheds 20 billion in week of NASA boycott. Then there is a kicker. The sentence that's just below the headline. But analysts say movement mainly due to price correction after first half results. In other words, we have a situation where a national paper, respected for its business coverage, is creating an impression that Safaricom has lost 20 billion out of a NASA boycott of Safaricom in this case.
That's not what the headline says.
But that's what it creates as an impression. In
doesn't.
fact, it's even a kicker on it.
It does not.
And I'll bring up another tweet that then was done by Business Daily that actually confirms that is what it becomes. In fact, then NASA politicians pick it.
Are you disputing the figures that are put here?
No, I'm not disputing the figures. In fact, I'm not disputing anything about the story. In fact, if you read the story, which then goes to page 4, the story is very factual. But no one talks to Safaricom in the entire of that story. No one. There is no quote from... Not just a minute. But financial reporting requires that you talk to all the people that are involved.
But it is factual, so what problem
it is factual, but it's not objective. You see, in objectivity, there is a dictate that you must speak to the characters in that story. And when you're unable to get them, put up a line that you are unable to get those guys in the sourcing of that story. Anyway, let me put it this way. I've just received something that has been filed in court, and being careful about sub judice, I'll not go to sub judice. But here is a reporter of Business Daily who has filed an affidavit in favor of the section of civil society called EVO, and he clearly admits that I was contracted independently by the petitioners to analyze images of Form 34As that have been sourced from IEBC. The reporter, by the way, is called Benjamin Otieno, and he has given an address. And then he goes on to explain that the Form 34A is on the website portal and blah, 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 and files an affidavit in favor of the petitioners. Now, this reporter, because he's also, I know the reporter on the byline, also covers for other media houses. He's the same reporter that will be relied upon to give a feedback on what people in, he comes from Homa Bay, I think that's where he reports from. I will confirm that. He has declared it somewhere, and he actually says he works for Nation Media Group. So this is the same reporter expected to give an objective opinion about coverage of the issues that you are putting out. And therefore,
the issue is that he filed a petition, which is a right of anyone to do so?
Yes, it is a right to do, and that is now the question. That when a reporter, a journalist of a media house like The Nation files a partisan affidavit in favor of a partisan cause, can we still trust that reporter for objective coverage in our newsrooms?
Larry, can you jump in?
Dennis Itumbi's argument is defective in so many ways, I don't even know where to start. But I'm going to attempt. First, about that Business Daily headline, I don't work for them regularly, but I've been a financial reporter. So this one is basically based on how the market moved. Safaricom is a 1 trillion shilling company, so 20 billion shillings lost in a week is not a big deal. If you consider the market capitalization of $1 trillion, that still gives it somewhere just over 950 billion shillings. And that story, which I've read in full, does explain in great detail. The analysts and the market watchers say it is not such much of a big deal.
Who does it quote, Harry? Because you've read it.
It quotes several market watchers. I think one from Dan Blair, another one from a different market watch as well. If Lorna can check, there's an analyst from Dan Blair quoted in that story.
Yeah, true, but saying what?
They talk about the likely impact of the boycott is not being felt just yet.
Bradley commenting about something he hasn't read, and he still wants to have a...
Hang on, Lorna, is that quote from a Dan Blair market watcher there?
Yes. Dan Blair, head of research, Lynette Muriungi.
And I didn't dispute that.
And she's there.
So you're saying this is the point of your argument, sir. You won't let
there's exotic capital analysts, so they've got
no, just read the quote by Dan Blair, because that is what Rally was taking.
I didn't realize I was supposed to cram the article, sir. If you told me that, I would have been...
I mean, if you read an article in detail, then you understand what you're talking about.
Let me explain this to you, because you haven't covered business. I have. Right. When you're reporting on how market activity has moved, Safaricom cannot comment on how the market activity did beyond saying we remain optimistic that our share is going to do well, etc. They can't talk about that without being in... otherwise, there would be a foul of capital markets regulations.
Agreed.
And you know this. So I don't understand your argument saying they should have been consulted in this. But let me move on. Let me move on to this. I don't know about this particular story you're saying. I don't know about the facts, so I can't comment on that. It's an allegation.
Communications Authority has then been questioned to comment on the issue of the boycott, I guess, because they're the ones informed of the data.
Right.
Okay.
And they say what?
Oh, they said that they just want that it is likely to hurt jobs.
You see,
investment in the
Dennis
ICT
likes
sector.
to drill down on the minutiae to try and make a point which does not exist.
It is very serious.
Let me
for a financial paper that's on the headline.
Let me extrapolate.
Unless you're saying the headline is minute.
The headline is, the entire story is fine.
Is a problem
based on my experience reporting business.
Is a problem perhaps here attaching the issue of the loss to this particular boycott by NASA? Is that the problem in this particular?
The association. The headline of this story.
I'm sorry. Can I just move on to what I was saying? You know what Dennis is saying is exactly what Lorna was referring to earlier. Different sides now see different facts. And you're looking for facts that only support your point of view, and you discard everything else that might disagree with that, which is this great big echo chamber we exist in, and the filter bubble where any information that it's like you can't carefully select facts only to support your point of view and ignore everything else. And then I realize in social media, in what we do now, it's an attention economy. And it is possible that using algorithms and using all sorts of other different psychological points, you try and make people believe because you know what their biases are, you know what their interests are, you know what they like,
But there's
and
no
then you
algorithm
use that.
in printed paper.
But we've moved on from that point, Dennis. That point
No,
does
no,
not
but it's a
exist.
fact. There's no algorithm in printed paper.
It's also a fact that you say this story is factual. The only problem you have is the association to the times.
And explain to him that 20 billion shillings might be a screaming headline, but Safaricom accounts for about 40% of the market
It is
traded
not
at the
explaining
Nairobi
the story.
Securities
If you
Exchange
drop this
every
story
day.
somewhere in the
It is
depths of
also
West
there
Pokot,
in that
What
story.
he's explaining will not be there. The story will
That
not
story
explain
is
that.
also
It's a
explains
business
that
daily
Safaricom
newspaper.
has
It's a very
40% of
specific.
market activity every
Exactly,
day.
and that is the question of the political
And
attachment.
990 something billion shillings out of a 1 trillion shilling market
Okay, yeah,
capitalization
go on,
company
I'll
is not a
just
big
go on.
deal. But I know the 20 billion is jumping at you and you
Wow.
think it's sensational. And we're arguing on such a small point. I don't know why we're wasting time on it. My point is, it's
Wow.
the whole argument about you see your own facts and ignore everything else. And
See, that's why
Dennis,
we get back to, again, these are not my own facts. They are business daily facts.
Which you don't dispute.
Yes.
what I was going to say,
Which I only dispute on one aspect. And I've explained
Which is the
it.
only
The
thing.
association to your
Yes, it is
competition
the
in
The
politics.
association to the competition.
And the
listen,
framing
the
of
opposition,
the headline. That's
All
what
right,
I'm having a
can
problem.
I-
And that is a
Mark?
problem, Caroline, and you must admit that.
No, it's a problem to you. It's not a problem.
It doesn't
to
look
Larry.
good to your
you.
yes.
Where you stand,
So,
it
so
doesn't
you'd like to
look- yes.
discount it. The
No,
same
no,
way as
yes,
discounting
no,
the
no.
world, the
We are not talking
security
about facts.
report.
You're
It
a
is a
facts
problem.
person, yeah?
It is a problem.
Let's talk about facts.
Let's talk
because
about
you're
the,
here
yes,
to
let's go to the
facts.
facts. It is a problem to the sub-editor. That is why he had to go with a kicker to explain the headline. And because kickers, when you are taught in journalism, are brought into a headline to explain the headline. And what does the kicker do from the sub-editor? But analysts say movement, mainly due to price correction. Why does he use but? Because he understands the headline is misleading in its form. So
Dennis.
in the kicker tries to explain
But
the
hasn't it
headline
done?
for
Dennis.
analysis.
Hasn't it done what
Dennis.
you just said you
Yes.
learnt in school? It explaining it further.
Exactly. And
context?
that is exactly the point.
But
and
it-
you see, no,
okay.
that is exactly the point, Mark. You see, when you run a headline, when
This is why
Safaricom
we have
sheds
280 characters
20
now.
million in a week of NASA boycott.
We're arguing a
When they
technical
were at
point.
Jacaranda yesterday, when NASA went to Jacaranda rally yesterday,
Are we
They
discussing
picked-
NASA or are we discussing social media?
I'm discussing social media. It was a tweet by NASA politicians.
But it is from a
So,
newspaper article.
Yes, the source was a newspaper article, and that's why I'm tackling the source
Wow.
to explain the tweet.
We should be talking
The
about
source
facts.
that was factual.
But
We
these
are
are,
here to talk about system, Yama facts.
Okay.
but those are the facts.
No,
Dennis,
no,
the
we're
kicker
not,
to the headline.
Actually, we're not here to talk about system. In my fact, that's his.
Dennis,
Dennis's.
we're talking about a technical point. How much journalism did you practice exactly?
I practiced journalism for about 7-8 years. By the way, I was a journalist of the year 2007, 2008.
I'm really happy for you. The
Yes.
point I'm making here is
Yes.
that it is easy to argue on those small points when you're missing the wider. For instance, the background on your system, your facts, is because NTV ran an excellent series of stories on the health scandal at the Ministry of Health called System ya Majambazi. That is when you came up
Which
with
failed,
System ya
by
Facts.
the way, which was wrong.
I don't think that's how people would see that. But moving forward, you see, there's about, in the average person reaches for their phone about 2,600 times in rich countries, and we're one of the most connected societies in the world. And so when you're reaching out for that, I think, I don't know if Mark has any data on this, but I think 150.
150% in Africa?
All right, so that's a lot. But I think WhatsApp is the biggest social network right now.
Absolutely.
And WhatsApp, because even your mother, your grandmother, they're all saying stuff on WhatsApp like, aya, why power metoka NASA? Or is it true that Deputy President Ruto's interview was pulled by CNN? And they believe this because it was there on WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And that's a bigger deal. I think we need some research, some data, Mark, no pressure, to be gone into on the impact of WhatsApp on this specific election, but also because it's very hard to track this. You don't know how many times this has been shared, where it came from, etc. But we need to know how many people in this election, for instance, were influenced by social media. Did they see posts claiming to be from news agencies that were not? I know we've had to take down one website that claimed most recently that the Deputy Chief Justice Kalpana Rawal was held at gunpoint or whatever, and it had the look of an NTV website, but that was not true. Yeah. And we had to send this person a cease and desist letter, etc. But in this election specifically, there have been many, many instances on WhatsApp of fake letters, some of which are being shared by the government now, of different things, videos that have been altered in a certain way to claim a certain view, and there's absolutely no research on that. Because I think on Facebook alone in the US election, they say as many as 146 million people could have been reached by Russian propaganda. Yeah. How many of those in Kenya can we say were influenced by all of this, the work of Cambridge Analytica here to obfuscate and to misinform or any other interested parties in that case. I can't say NASA also had its share of fake news, either by the party or by the interested parties working for them. But that I think is something that still, it's a green area, it's a gray area that has not been explored.
Right.
Can we just agree that we see things from where we are and not for what they are? Okay? Because part of the problem is this. Interpretation of data, regardless of where it is, and I'm really glad you're happy to do that, because confirmation bias and there's a whole study of anthropology around our biases, whether they are innate, whether we understand what we're doing them. But part of the challenge, I feel, and why social media is able to create such a challenge, is that going back to psychology and saying we are unable to, if you challenge me, if you challenge my position, if you challenge what I believe, I will find a way to stand back, kick back, push back on it, okay? And part of it, excuse me, Dennis, I would really appreciate it if for 5 minutes you could just listen to hear and not to respond. Okay? Because you're listening to respond, not to even hear. So all I'm saying,
hold on, Dennis. Hold on, Dennis.
God, just listen to hear.
Hold on, yes. Go ahead.
I'm not fighting with you.
Go ahead, Lon.
But you've raised issues that deserve a response.
This one, can we just agree that you are a journalist? Fact, what is your background?
No, I mean...
No, I'm just asking, because then for your response, you're coming at it as so much attack. You're not even trying to hear that this is not about my personal opinion. This is about the facts that you keep talking about, researched over time by scientists and people who understand these things. I'm not asked even a question. I was stating... No, I was saying something. Can I finish?
You finish the point. Finish the point, because we need to get to the...
I'm not applying for a job in your consultancy firm. So
hold on. Let's not get worked up here. Let's not get worked up here.
Can I just finish what I was saying?
Let her finish her point. Let her finish her point.
So can I finish?
Granted.
Wow. Mark, that he has to be the one to grant permission. It's an indication of who's running this show. Yes. So part of it is to come back and say this. No matter what you push and say, and we understand why CNN ran an advert that this is an apple. No matter how much time you hear it's a banana, it is an apple. Some people will try and convince you that it is a banana, but it is an apple. And that does not change, is because we all have biases, okay? That's a fact. We all have biases. Now, part of the things that we are taught professionally is to how to overcome those biases. And there's examples, and I'll give just one. Great example in the US, for the longest time, the orchestra in New York only picked male musicians. Right. Nothing else, they just picked male. And somebody said, why would you only pick male musicians? And they're like, because they're the best. And that was factually wrong. That they had done it for 20 years did not make it right. And somebody said, your most important thing here is because the people who make the selection of the musicians are white male. So they're looking for people who look like them. How did they solve that? They did not go into many things. They picked a curtain, a black curtain. And they said, everyone who auditions from now forth will audition behind a curtain. And all you have to do is listen to the music. You don't need to see who's playing it. That simple fact alone, that simple removal for that bias, just raised the number of women, colored people who joined the choir by over 20%. And over 10 years later, that number has continued to change. What am I saying? I am saying in everything we do, we have a lens with which we look at it. And part of what we sometimes need to do is apply a black curtain in our lives so that we can hear what is being said without us using everything else to see and come into an interpretation and using all these things. Because sometimes the person who says it makes more impact than what is being said. And that's where we tend to see things from where we are, not always for what they are. And that is why the world consistently has things like racism, where I see you as a black person and you don't present Mark Masai. You present something very specific, a threat, somebody I can't trust, a murderer, you wear a hoodie, and for sure you're carrying a gun. Now, I see a kid in the street who looks rugged, he's coming towards me, he's a chokora, he could attack me, he could do any of these things. We do not see things necessarily, we have not even taken the time to see whether he is that person. Yes. And unfortunately, on social media, we have a lot of things like that that could apply to us. Where if I have a preconceived notion, even if it's a fear, if I see somebody who reinforces that fear, they become my person to go to. And a lot of times, it's that echo chamber I'm talking about, being part of that hyper partnership, doing all these things, where you only listen to respond to your bias. You're actually not even willing to hear what is being said.
Let me respond to my bias. Gladly so.
Responding to your own bias?
Yes. Lorna here, when we had this discussion about Safaricom, said Communication Authority had responded. Intentionally, when I asked her to read what they had said, intentionally she avoided to go into it because she realized this comment had happened a week earlier before this article was done. And that is the same thing she gets really called about as she presents that. But that said, I mentioned here there is a business daily reporter from Homa Bay who has filed
A petition.
not a petition, an affidavit to support a partisan cause. Yet we expect an objective report from him about coverage of the election from where he stands.
Okay. So what's your point on
Is
this?
your problem that he's a reporter from Homa Bay or from the Business Daily?
From the Business Daily.
Okay.
I said
So
Homa
you
Bay
just added Homa Bay for context.
because he's based in Homa Bay.
How
All right.
convenient.
And to that point, as we
It's
get
based
to the
in Homa Bay,
concluding
actually.
points,
Well, that's a fact.
I'd want Larry to speak on because the technology editor, and I'll still give you an opportunity to finish on this. We're always on the line here when we express our views. Where do we draw the line as a journalist representing Nation Media Group, as an individual, and what's a policy that guides that?
I have learned to be very careful about what I say, and which is a difficult bridge for me to walk because I also write a column, and a column is primarily an opinion. But I do realize now that anything I say will be construed to mean, is that Nation saying it? I'm like, come on, this is my Twitter account. It's not Linus Kaikai or Joe Muganda holding my hand telling me tweet this. But I realize the power, the influence I have when millions of people follow me, they will see anything I do say as a reflection of that. And the times when I do speak up, it's something that was already on my column or is coming up in my column, or it's something that is a fact. There are no two sets of facts. The fact is the fact is the fact. For instance, if I say the IEBC is running late, they're running late. We can't disagree on that. You can't say I'm saying the IEBC is running late because I'm pro-NAS or pro-Jubilee. It's just like they were supposed to begin at 3, it's 3:50, they haven't begun. But even those these days will be seen as partisan because we live in this hyper-partisan field where even any indication of a shade of opinion is seen to be partisan, which makes no sense. But the other one is just generally, I think, for people, those of us that cover news, we have to be very careful about what we're saying on social media so that not to be seen as a representation of Nation Media Group. And especially if, like Dennis is alluding, this person whom I don't know, I haven't seen the facts, possibly a freelancer, it's a dicey situation if in fact it is true, because I don't know how somebody who identifies as a reporter could be contracted by a political party to do something like that. It would be very inappropriate if that were true. And it's the same regulations that guide us. If it is something that you'd not put in your newspaper article, you'd not say it on a TV story, then you probably have no business saying it. And news organizations around the world are having to grapple with it between making reporters and making news journalists available and accessible to audiences on social media, and making sure that they still maintain that professional angle.
Okay. Okay, he says.
Look, we agree with Dennis on something.
And Mark, I'll get to you on the issue of the influences and if we can expect to be able to live with that or actually sift through the noise that is in that space. But first, Carol, you've been quiet for a bit. As the managing editor of the digital arm at Standard Media Group, how are we embracing to either survive or even be relevant in terms of pushing back on the misinformation through social media? How are we using these platforms, or how can we encourage other media houses to do the same?
All right. First, I'll take a few steps back and answer Larry. We can actually track content that is shared on WhatsApp. You just need to put a tag on your website and you're able to see the back end and see the stories that are being shared on WhatsApp.
I was talking about maybe a video or an image.
Yes, yeah. So back to your question, Mark. Right now, social media has become a source of news for news leads for journalists. So you can be on your desk and you see someone has posted a picture of an accident of a prominent personality. What normally happens is immediately, if it has happened along, say, Machakos or where, you call a colleague who is there to verify, get a police confirmation, and, of course, break the news. Sometimes it can get very difficult because the person who's broken the news is what we call a credible person, a person of influence. But he is, for example, a politician who is releasing certain information that is damning to the other side. So there's always the dilemma, do we say it as it is? And we saw that dilemma we faced when there was this season of affidavits. because I can run to court and I can actually claim that you've done this or even question your sexual orientation. So when it comes through his platform, sent to me on WhatsApp, do I report it? Do I say Lorna has a history of mental illness because Dennis went and saw an affidavit? So we have to have some judgment. Mm-hmm. So all these affidavits flying around, is it in public interest? Is it in good taste? Because do I start publishing what you say, he said? So that's where responsibility comes in. So even what he's showing here, you see, it's just a he said, she said kind of report. Do we see it tomorrow in the newspaper? A sensible editor will, of course, ask many questions. And perhaps confirm, first of all, whether it's genuine, but also take it through several news tests. Also, we are seeing social media being used to break news. Something happens immediately, it's broken on social media. We saw that when the late Gakuru died. I think one of the news stations broke it on I think on Facebook. Right. So now we are on the screen of Facebook than on TV than on radio. So we are seeing it as a fast screen. But I put a caveat. Remember, these platforms are commercial. So when I use Facebook to distribute my news, remember, it targets. So they're algorithms. So these guys are also looking for money. So they want me to, as a publisher, to boost content. So they'll deliberately not expose my content to certain constituents. They'll actually reduce the reach because they want me to pay for the reach. And that's how we are falling into this trap of having to pay to satisfy somebody's bottom line. You all know Facebook gained about, I've seen the last quarter report, 50 million users. The last Q3 report, 50 million users. I think 1.73 billion revenues, 737, yes. So they have to make money. So as publishers, if I'm working for Standard or I'm working for Nation or wherever, even if I put a story out, it has its limits. Okay. So we go back to traditional media. TV has probably more reach, if you ask me right now. Radio, because now Mark Zuckerberg and all those Twitter fellows have realized media houses are making money out of reach, so they are reducing the reach. So if you ask me, traditional media is still relevant. My frequency is still there because once I get into a microphone, I am guaranteed I am going to reach 50 million or 3 million or so on and so forth. And last but not least, I echo what Laura has said. When audiences read reports, they have a lens, a bias lens. It happens. And that's why sometimes I say in the newsroom, I don't know what objectivity is. It's very difficult. And that's why sometimes you're told, if you have an interest in this report, please declare and not report about it. But yes, bias is there. And his point of truth about that business story is his point of truth. He has his point of truth. The question is, what is truth?
What is truth? And Mark, now to you, and then I'll have Dennis and then Lady Lorna to finalize. The issue of the armies out there who are influencing information. First of all, you came with a very positive part, and I'm sorry I didn't give you time to talk about it, because we can make good money out of this, not just money, but we can run good causes online. But there's the other aspect that leaves people almost helpless, feeling like there's an army out there controlling the information. But is the end user helpless?
I don't believe they are. I feel that they ultimately are the ones that their reality is shaped around their habits. So what we know is that if you continually Google and make searches on that search engine or others, it will begin to affect what you see. So all of us can make one particular search term about this country today and see different results, because Google is working hard, knowing that in excess of, I think it's 80% of clicks come from this first page. That not only will it accept advertisers' money to show our audience, watching this a particular point of view, but it will also organically rank content based off of its pre-approved, essentially a mechanism formerly known as EdgeRank. So I think that unless you are a passerby online, or unless you're very proactive about your privacy, in many ways, the reality that you experience and see outside of places like, I guess, WhatsApp is your making. Now, you may not have been, I guess, aware of this, but it's part of the reason why some people say, given the amount of time and attention that people spend on Facebook, could they actually pay us a universal income? We all generate finances. No, really. We all generate money for this organization and this corporation. And they're here making Facebook access free. It's absorbing more and more of these two non-renewable resources of time and attention. And so are they entitled to pay us back? And before we feel bad for them, they had I think a 79% increase in profits at their last earnings call. So they're doing okay. And this is despite all the challenges in the US. So I think the challenge here is, how do we promote a better form of internet literacy? There's a study that happened, I mentioned casually earlier, and Larry was keen to check. Is that what you said, Mark, that Vice is now promoting or advancing the internet as we know it? There was a study, and there's different people on different sides about this study, as this panel would allude to, that went out into rural parts of Kenya and equipped everyday Kenyans there with a smartphone. Now, after a year and monitoring people with the smartphones, a good proportion of them were worse for wear, meaning they were some steps behind socioeconomically. And why is that? Because previously, I have this fixed pot of income, and in there, I have airtime. I understand how airtime works. I go to the person there. They sell me airtime. I go and I top it up with my mobile money. However, add megabytes. Who defines a megabyte for anyone in this country? Nobody. That's your job to figure out. On top of that, you have, as I said, sports betting and gaming, and that industry that is a place, if you think about the time and attention people put to the Premier League, it's a place people are actually desiring already and committing their time and attention, but this is a fixed sum of money. So what happens after years? Nobody taught me a megabyte. I still have this fixed income. And because of that and several other factors, you find people at times net negative, but there's still a question of these smartphones are going to reach them anyway, so what do we do, right? I think the last point maybe I'll try and share is you had asked me about influence, and I love to speak about this. So when we talk about somebody being influential, it also happens when we talk about it, we mean some kind of scale, because parents have influence over their children, but we don't call parents influencers, do we? Yes. Right? So there's that first element. So the currency of influence is trust. And we've been publishing as Nendo since 2014. In fact, Dennis was actually one of our guests at this special breakfast we held, where we predicted some really key forks in the road and challenges for trust in our digital society if brands at that time did not make some very clear decisions. They have oftentimes paid people and asked them to withhold the fact that they've been paid. Whereas for the influencer, what they don't realize, quote-unquote influencer, is that trust is the commodity they're selling, not even their audience, but the trust therein. So you can take someone with a smaller audience, ideally, but if there's higher trust, you get the actual commodity. So the final, I think, point for me here is to quote from a friend, an author here called Faris Yacob, and he says that the paradox of influencer marketing is that when we attempt to buy influence, we transform it into an endorsement, which everyone understands is commercially created fiction. And that in and of itself, so this is why when you see a celebrity in an advertisement, they're not necessarily influential, and some people don't believe what they're saying because they understand this is a commercial relationship. So the challenge there is, we've to Larry's point, we have a study around, fake and false news that we've been trying to wrangle our heads around. It's quite a complex area, but you will see people take advantage of citizen journalism with large mainstream media houses, ensure that a story passes through the veil of that, passes all the checks and so on, and then they'll take that story, which has been published by a reputable media house, and then promote it. Right. And so you're seeing an advertisement for a media house you know and trust in, an institution you've learned to trust in, but the point of view passed on as citizen journalism may be partisan in and of itself. So the challenge here is that even the trust in institutions has been, media institutions particularly, has been coming down, and that leaves bloggers with this tremendous opportunity, which some have used, of course, for good gain. As I said, my disposition is positive, but there are people who have emerged now, a cabal of seemingly, to Caroline's point, in some ways, if you drill down to the actual credibility of their influence, it may be more, as I said, more smoke than fire, more bark than bite. But it does have the illusion that there is a tremendous deal of influence, and that gives cause for concern, especially when you have, companies and corporations who just the very mention of an accusation towards them can have a bump or an actual substantive impact on their share price. So it's a place where trust is the commodity hardest to find, hardest to earn. People don't trust institutions or brands as much, or media houses, but in this circle of influencers, ultimately the more they sell themselves, the less trust they have.
All right. You've had you say, I'll have Dennis quickly and Lorna as you finalize on this issue.
Oh, well, I will sum up this evening from where I sit this way. First, there's a personal opinion that has been published by media called World Internal Security and Policy Index, declared on page 55 as a personal opinion. And when people say that facts depend on where you sit, some facts are just fact. It's raining, it's raining.
Sorry,
It
Dennis,
is declared.
why would it be an opinion if it is a ranking? Why would he rank something if it's an opinion? That makes no sense. The argument falls down on that alone.
Larry, page 55. In my opinion, with regard to modernization of the police and police reform in general, 7 major themes should be followed.
How many pages is that report?
64 pages.
You just like that one paragraph in that entire report because it's supposed what you want to say, which exactly underscores what you've been trying to say all evening.
Okay.
You like this one paragraph which supports your point of
In
view.
64 pages, he does not declare interest until this page that he declares interest.
You said you're going to post the 64-page index on your own platform.
Timeline, yes. Now, and now Rari has interfered with my flow of thought, but this is it. On legitimacy, it clearly declares 2014 is where they're relying on. On violent crime, they rely on 2010. So this report also, other than the fact that it's a personal opinion, that is not original. It relies on other reports by Gallup. It declares global terrorism
Which
index,
are not credible?
World Justice Project.
Which are not credible?
They are credible, but they are over a year called 2010 and 2012 and 2013, not 2016.
So what is your argument? That is an opinion or that the report is not credible?
Larry, can I just conclude? You had your time. Let me just conclude.
On the Business Daily, that is factual.
The second issue, on this Business Daily front page, there is Coop Bank 9 months net profit down 9.5%. No one is doubting that. Rotich I syndicated loan ahead of Eurobond. No one is disputing that. Java cast net wider after new outlet at SIU. No one has an issue. Why is there an issue on the story on Safaricom?
Why do you have an issue?
I'll leave it at that. Because, I mean, we are concluding. And finally, I also gave an affidavit of a Business Daily reporter who is filing a report for a partisan cause through the evil society. Not allegedly.
Give him a
it
right
is
of
a
reply.
petition in court. It's not alleged.
So
it's a
give
fact.
him a right of reply.
Yeah, of course, he has a right of reply.
This, yes.
He has a right of reply. I state it is up to him to right of
Benjamin
reply.
Otieno
Finally, I'll conclude by saying this. I'll conclude with the words of Paul to the church in Ephesus, as recorded in the book of Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 25. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. Amen.
That advice,
right back at
you. You should take that first.
Lorna,
I think when we started this, we talked about the social media impacting democracy, and I talked about what the principles of democracy are. And we've touched on all those things there. And I think, just to echo what Mark said, first, he talked about trust. And the question is, are we challenging trust? Is trust being challenged on this? And if we can all say no, that's a lie, because the truth is that's the biggest commodity that has been challenged, so trust. Informed dialogue. Informed dialogue, everyone has an opinion, everyone has a viewpoint, everyone has a lens. A shared sense of reality, clearly that we have lost. There is really no shared sense of reality. Everyone kind of is all over the place. Mutual consent and participation. A lot of this is being talked to, not conversation. You're being told. It's about this. On the issue that Carol was talking about, what is the role of mainstream media? I think one of the things is that all these things don't happen in vacuums, okay? There's a space, someone takes it up. And one of the things I think really the newsrooms, as traditional newsrooms, are going to fall back on and would really allow them to get credibility and stuff is to be no longer, your job is no longer to break news. Your job is to analyze the story and give us really the detail, go into it. I will know that the stocks have dropped in 2 seconds on Twitter because someone broke it. If I tune into the 9 o'clock news, I don't need to see that. I need to understand what happened. And so the future of the newsroom is research, data analysis, a lot of getting more information, talking to people across sectors. That's going to be I see that being the future of the newsroom. Because only if you, I always say you cannot fix a problem with what started it in the first place. So if you hope you're going to counter something like what he's saying with 140 characters or consistently, you're going to keep shouting at one another because they're not willing to move out of their stand, right? And people are not willing to respond, to listen, just to hear what you're saying and then respond. They're listening to you to hit back at what you're saying, not necessarily to be like, okay, you know what, we could disagree on this, but on that I agree with you. And we don't have that. And that's partly what you continuously see, continuously hear. And for me, that was what was happening here, is that at no point is there someone just saying, I came in here with an agenda, my agenda is to do A, B, C. But that's the whole thing about communication, is at some point, you have to hear what the other person is saying for you to actually make a move. And so for me, it's going back and saying, understand that the algorithms exist.
Right.
This is not accidental. There is deliberate. There is business to be made. There is money to be made. There is power to be taken. You are going to use your tools. He clearly did not answer yes or no as to the issue of, are you using these things? And said, don't blame us if we're good at something. Yes.
He says
if there's an algorithm to be used to manipulate you to my benefit, I will use it. So if you can say that, then there's other things that you would be able to do. And this is not just about politics. It's about media. It's about brands. It's about business. It's about Coca-Cola telling us the soda is fantastic. And no one actually, then someone else say, oh, but it has like 5 spoons of sugar. They will never come and say it has the sugar in it. That's your job to find out. And lastly, I think part of the thing for me about social media, and this was a deliberate effort, is I was falling into the challenge of echo chambers, of only listening to people who shared my viewpoint, reinforce that. And one of the things I've deliberately done over this year is follow and start following people who I vehemently disagree with. Because it is important to understand what is being said. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. That story is across. And so for me, what social media has really allowed me to do is to really just, instead of isolating myself to kind of just be with a safe space, is really just go to the vilest of the vile. You know, people who tweet things and you look at it and you're like, oh my goodness, and everyone's like, I don't understand why you do this. I said, because I truly believe that when people show you who they are the first time, believe them. And there's a lot of people who are just showing their true colors.
I wonder if it's a coincidence you're seated close to Dennis.
You never know. Sometimes you put these things out into the universe and they match up.
I agree with Lorna, and I think one of the things we don't have as a country is we don't know how to disagree. And there's a fantastic New York Times article on the art of disagreement and how that is a lost form right now. For instance, Dennis and I disagree on many, many things, but we still follow each other. I don't know why he follows me. Maybe he's a sucker for punishment. But I appreciate his point of view, and sometimes I like to push back on that even on social media. And it makes for a robust debate, which I think is what our democracy depends on. It's a marketplace of ideas, and you must listen, especially to those you disagree with. Because, and I think people don't realize this, but it's a challenge we must put out to everybody who's watching tonight. Do you follow those you disagree with? Because you have a blind spot you don't even realize. So that if you're pro-Jubilee and you only follow Jubilee influencers and bloggers, the 36 of them, and who else, and nobody else, that's problematic. If you're from NASA and you only follow the NASA MPs and Mutula Jr. and etc., and you're not listening to anybody from the other side, how will you allow yourself to be challenged? How will you have your thoughts tested? And that's not happening right now. But that said, it was jarring for me to hear Dennis give such a rousing defense of propaganda as a good thing, because we all know the history of Joseph Goebbels, who was Hitler's Minister of Propaganda, and how well that turned out.
What year was that, right?
1930, 40 something. So it's problematic for me to hear propaganda cast in that positive light and seen.
Is it not? You're not taught propaganda and communication as a positive thing when you're calling for media.
As a reality, it's not necessarily
in
as
conclusion.
Yes, of course, and this is a reality. That's what I said. I mean, the defense was for reality, not for fiction.
That shouldn't necessarily be accepted and allowed to continue without being challenged.
Well, transforming Kenya is propaganda for government, which is good. It's positive. I mean,
That's
surely, nation is the home of truth. These are slogans are propaganda.
Well, that's
what scripture again did you? What scripture again did you tell?
Falsehoods.
Ephesians 4:25, and what I said here is true.
Ephesians 4:25. We'll leave it at that. Let's
rooting back. I'm sorry, Mark.
Yeah.
Just one more thing. Rooting back to what we said at the beginning, I think our democracy will survive any attempts to undermine it. Propaganda, misinformation, fake news, and all of that. We've been through worse, and we are here today. So any newfangled ways to try and subvert the will of the people, pun intended, and undermine the democracy will survive. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Mark.
I embrace that.
Okay, go.
Even if you resist.
All right, we'll embrace after. I don't know if that's what you meant, but Larry Mado, technology editor here, and of course a pundit in many ways, and pun intended. He wears many hats here. Mark Kaigwa, thank you very much for your time, and you can see his videos on Nendo. It's YouTube. Digital Africa, yes.
Nendo.co.ke.
Yes, he gives a lot of information on how you can actually utilize the social media to your benefit. And Lorna Irungu, a communication strategist, and if she's following you, you know that you're an enemy. Thank you for joining us.
Like that. I now follow everyone.
Dennis Itumbi, thank you again for your time here. And Carol Kimutai, I would really want to have you again on this panel. Thank you for your time representing the Standard Media Group. And to my colleagues who are behind the cameras here and in the gallery, hopefully still awake, but I'm just saying good night. Thank you for watching.